Hello, my name is Alyssa. I have a story for you. I am 17 years old, but my encounter with the paranormal happened when I was 16. My story takes place around May or June of 2016. It was moving day. I was helping my stepmother move. Since I had not seen her new house, I went with my uncle to go see it. While waiting for my family, my uncle began telling me that the oldest brother, Mondo, himself, and his on and off girlfriend had been visiting haunted places and playing with a Ouija board for the last 2 weeks, but kept returning to this farmhouse for the last 5 days straight. As my uncle told me about this farmhouse, my excitement grew and grew. I really like creepy things, especially anything that had to do with the paranormal. I then confessed I wanted to go visit this farmhouse as well. Turns out, they were going again that night, so they let me join them. We left the house around 11 or around midnight. The farmhouse is called Barrett Ranch House. It is located right off of Proctor Valley in San Diego, California. The miles of dirt road travels from Chula Vista to Jamul. Proctor Valley is notoriously haunted, and it has been for over a century. So the way I saw it was that we were driving on a haunted dirt road to a haunted farmhouse. However, our actions continue to reflect our idiotic behavior throughout the night. It didn't help that this took place during a full moon. According to Mondo, cults tended to worship at Proctor during a full moon. To make matters worse, by the time we were actually on Proctor Valley, it was witching hour. The whole time, Mondo was texting a girl who had went with them last time to the farm. He was asking her if she wanted to go. She said she was at the border at the moment, but would take an Uber ride to meet us there. When we finally arrived at the farmhouse, my uncle made sure to check with his headlights to make sure no one was there. As soon as we pulled up, I felt a sense of déjà vu. A few nights before, I had a dream that I was 5 and had went to a red school that was located next to a red house. Both buildings had looked exactly the same in my dream. After knowing it was empty, we drove back to a gas station to wait for the girl Mondo was talking to. We'll call her Tiff. After what seemed like forever, Tiff finally showed up. We repeated the process of making sure no one was inside. The coast was clear. After we got out, we all heard a bat. Mondo explained every time they heard the bat, something was going to happen. From the farmhouse, you could see Proctor. The whole area was covered in red clouds that had specks of gray and black. The farmhouse's clouds were white, with hints of blue and green from the full moon. This only added to the eerie feeling I felt. I also felt sick to my stomach. All of us except Tiff had a weapon, and slowly we made our way into the house. The door was missing. Windows that were covered up were now completely exposed. Random items such as photos or board games were scattered all across the floor. There was a shredded wall with a big hole on the left side when you first enter. There's a chimney to the right. After the main room, there's a little hallway, and at the end of that hallway, you can either go straight into another room, or you could go upstairs that led to the attic. So there's a total of 3 rooms in this house. The room next to the end of the hallway had all kinds of rubbish. There was even a sign that said not to vandalize the house. Apparently, one day the owner wanted to restore it to its former beauty. After we left that room, we headed towards the attic. This whole time I was gripping my knife so tightly that I could have cut myself with it if it wasn't in its sheath. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I have never been so scared in my life, and that bat wouldn't shut up. It was like a fire alarm system. It would stop for 2 seconds, but then would start up again. There wasn't much in the attic. It was small, probably about the size of a classroom, if not less. There were a couple of wrappers from the gas station that was across the street. This hinted that someone could possibly be living there or hanging out there at the moment. There was also a hollow space that was probably used for a closet, but it was empty. My uncle's on and off girlfriend, who we will call Kate, had told me that I looked sick. I reassured her I was fine, even though I really wasn't. We finally went downstairs to the main room. We went through the rubbish on the floor. My heartbeat was still beating pretty crazy, but within the next second, it dropped to the pit of my stomach. In 1 second we were chatting, the next we heard footsteps from the attic. We all turned to one another. The expressions on everyone's face told us that they had heard it too. Quickly, we huddled together. We debated on what to do. Like the coward I am, I wanted to go outside. I wanted to get away. Kate had said she had heard the bushes from outside shuffle. However, I was running on fear. That meant I didn't care. I hadn't heard it yet. I listened closely. Sure enough, there was something moving in the bushes outside. At the moment, I thought it was a rabbit, so I insisted on going out. Mondo and my uncle decided to stay and check out the attic. They wanted to take pictures and see if someone was up there, even though we were just there like 5 minutes ago. Kate, Tiff, and I all went outside. Mondo and my uncle didn't go straight to the attic like I thought they would. At first, they just stood in the main room. Mondo took lead into slowly going into the hallway. The girls and I stood outside more than 15 feet away, staring at the shuffling bushes. None of us moved, though. We wanted to wait until the guys had come out to investigate. My pounding heartbeat only sped up as I remembered the Colts that were out that night. I thought there was a possibility someone or a group of them were in the bushes, ready to lure us out to our deaths or jump us. The bushes in the back were a couple of feet tall, but in front was a patch of small, thin, see-through bushes. They were almost like flowers. There were two right next to each other, so close they were touching. In spite of that, only one was moving. Two large bushes and only one was moving. By the sound, it seemed like something was stepping on it. Kate had her eye on the bush that would move frequently. I kept my eye on Mondo and my uncle. They were about to enter the hallway, when all of a sudden, they ran out of the house as fast as they could. My panting brother commented that they heard a loud thump that was right next to him. Kate pointed to the bushes, saying how they were moving. At first they were still, but then they began to shuffle once more. With squinted eyes, my uncle made his way over there. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, the bush shuffled again. My uncle stuck a camera into its face, and it stopped again. My uncle backed away, and again it began to move. My uncle commented that it seemed to flatten, as if it was being stepped on, which is what I had thought as well. We all went over to the area and stuck our hands out. It was as cold as a dead body. You could immediately tell the difference of the temperature. My uncle wanted to see if anyone was there messing with us, so we walked towards the house that was next to it. And there was no one. Tiff yelped, explaining there was someone in the window. Kate shouted back that was impossible because the windows of the first house were covered with wood. They weren't. They were covered last time, she stood, mouth agape. We made our way back to the second house. My brother and uncle wanted to go back in, but I just wanted to leave. In the midst of our talking, I heard something scraping across the cement outside the house. That table just moved, Mondo gasped. I hadn't seen it move, but I heard it. It was a black stand that looked kind of like a table. No one else saw or heard it, but I immediately believed him, since I know I had heard it too. It looked heavy, so I doubt anyone could move it easily. After that, Mondo, Tiff, and my uncle went back into the house. Kate and I went down the little hill to our car. I heard those short, 2-foot-high bushes move. I literally jumped into the seat, not caring that I landed a little painfully on a purse. We had to wait probably 30 minutes before Mondo, my uncle, and Tiff returned to the car. We made our way back to Proctor Valley. They wanted to play the Ouija at Proctor. Now, my father is a devil worshiper, so I knew it was wrong to. Not to mention it was a full moon, and it was the witching hour. However, I considered playing. We settled in the middle of Proctor. We all sat in the car, Mondo asking if we were going to play or not. My uncle cut the engine. We were in complete silence. We all waited until someone got out of the car, but no one does. Mondo lights a cigarette. Apparently last time they played the Ouija board, there was a little girl and a little boy. My brother calls out the little girl's name. "Do you want to play with Kate, Sarah?" Mondo asked. Sarah was apparently the little girl from the Ouija board. Kate curses at him. You could tell she was starting to get scared. She then too asked the little boy if he wanted to play with Mondo. Did you hear that? We all froze. Kate sat in the passenger seat while Mondo sat behind her. They were the only two that had heard the noise. We sat in silence, still debating to play the Ouija board or not. We beat around the bush about playing it. Still, no one got out of the car. I closed my eyes, then I heard something break behind us. The closest way to explain the sound was as if a chip bag was opening. Mondo had asked if anyone heard that one. Everyone shook their heads except me. I nodded. At this point, Kate was pretty scared when the tree a couple of feet away from us also shuffled. My uncle took pictures around the leaves. Kate pushed herself closer to my uncle. "Look at the tree," she pointed at the camera. "Yeah, it looks like a blue orb." My uncle took more pictures. "Sarah, is that you? Do you want to play with Kate?" Mondo teased. "That's not funny, Mondo," Kate cursed. "They're right outside my window now," she yelped. My uncle looked through the photos with Kate. "They do look like orbs," my uncle repeated. Let's go. I want to go." There was a plea in her voice, and I wholeheartedly agree. We did leave since it was near the end of the witching hour. We didn't play the Ouija board, and I fell asleep after that. I never did get to see those pictures. I asked about them, but my uncle said he didn't know where they were, and that was the end of that. Later, I found out that the Barrett house had been a nursery. I worked third shift as a security guard. I was at a location in a small town for about 2 months. There was a main building and a small guard building outside. That's where everyone passed through to get to the other building. Now, my nights consisted of watching the CCTV monitors. But on nights when no one else was there, I would patrol the outside area and inside of the building. One night, I was looking through the camera footage as it played live, and I swear I saw an orb appear on camera. It was just outside the guard building. I honestly thought it was a bug or something at first, until I realized it was just floating there in one spot, and it was pretty bright. I checked around to see if a puddle of water wasn't reflecting anything, but that thought was just me grasping at straws, as it hadn't rained for days. So I just wrote it off as a camera glitch or something, until I saw a mist-like figure appear to be standing directly across the little road that ran past the guard shack. I looked out of the window to the exact spot that the figure had appeared on the cameras, but there was nothing there. I grabbed my cell phone and I started to record it with my camera. This is a big no-no when you're working security. I filmed the figure on the screen for a bit. Suddenly, the orb disappeared, and the figure soon faded away as well. This encounter was nothing more than creepy to me, and I messaged the video to my fiancée and her sister. The sister, of course, who was skeptical, said that it was nothing, that the place couldn't be haunted, and that the cameras had glitched up. So I tried to write it off myself. That was until October 8 of 2016. I was looking at the monitors again late at night after finishing a patrol. As I watched, the main building's motion sensor door opened and it closed right as I looked over to the camera feed. There was no wind blowing, no leaves, no animals, or any reason for the door's motion sensor to go off. Instantly, I was filled with a dreadful feeling, like I was being watched, like I was not alone. And then the clicking started. It sounded like someone was flipping the light switches on and off. The lights, however, weren't turning on and off, but the clicking sound continued. Then I realized it was coming from the other side of the dropped ceiling. Then clicking erupted from different directions. The noise multiplied until there were about 6 different clicking noises in the ceiling, all out of sync and moving around. I reached into my pocket and I grabbed my multi-tool. I tried to convince myself not to give in to this fear. I did not leave, and I constantly checked my surroundings. Then suddenly, as quick as it all started, it all stopped with one final click. Then silence. I sat there in that silence for a long while. Eventually, the fear and dread left, and I sat there nervously watching the cameras again until my relief showed up. I have experienced a lot of strange things in my life. and I believe I've been attacked once or twice by evil spirits. But this experience by far is one of the creepiest I've ever had. I used to work at a Holiday Inn for about 10 or 11 years before quitting due to different reasons. It was around Christmas, so we were definitely swamped with people. It was around 12 a.m. when I got a call on the phone requesting me to go up to room 177 because of a noise complaint. I used the elevator, walked over to 177, and I knocked on the door. But no one answered. Instead, I heard the door behind me open. A resident named Tanner exited into the hallway, him being the person who had called. He said, "They keep screaming at random, and 2 other people have tried knocking to see who's in there, but no one has answered." Before he could completely finish with his explanation, a loud scream came from the room behind me, and it sounded feminine. I first tried the handle and had no luck, and the only reply was the slam of a door inside room 177. I pulled the 2-way radio from my belt, and I requested that someone bring me a key for this room. Not long after, we heard the ding of the elevator bell, and I saw my friend Jerry step out. "Hey man, what's—" Again, a loud scream came from beyond the door. "Oh," he simply said. Jerry was very wide-eyed looking at the door now. He walked up to it and unlocked it with the key. Then, before he put his hand on the knob, the door opened, just a crack. Jerry backed away slowly, and I moved forward with my flashlight in hand. Before I pushed the door open, I asked Tanner to go back into his room for safety. After his door shut, I pushed the door to 177 open, to be met with nothing behind it. I tried to take a step in, then the door slammed shut, hitting my toe in fact. I replied with a loud cuss, which brought out another resident next to room 177 to poke his head out into the hall. "Can I ask what's going on? Are the people in there okay?" I replied saying that everything was fine and that they should go back into their rooms. I grabbed my 2-way and asked for the name of the person staying in room 177. The response was that it wasn't being used until after Christmas passed, due to a recent suicide. Completely stunned, I put my 2-way on my belt again, and I looked at Jerry, who in turn looked just as scared, his face white as a sheet. I looked back at the door, standing there, before being brought back to reality by another ear-piercing scream. I asked Jerry what we should do. He opened his mouth to speak, only letting out a small breath, and then he shrugged. I turned to the door and tried the handle again, noticing that it was still unlocked. I asked Jerry to go get a crowbar from downstairs. I stayed there, hand on the handle, making sure that it wouldn't be able to lock while I waited. Jerry returned, crowbar in hand. "Here, just don't get locked in there," Jerry said, handing me the crowbar. I opened the door, walked in, and looked around with my flashlight. I checked every room and walked back out into the hallway. "Nothing," I said. "What? That's impossible," Jerry replied. We then heard a god-awful noise over the 2-way. It sounded like dumping metal in a blender and setting it to smoothie. Then it got quiet, and all we heard was a whispered, "Thank you," before the door slowly swung shut and locked itself again. After that, there wasn't much of an issue, but anytime someone stayed in 177, they always said that they felt someone else in the room with them whenever they were inside. David always said the story was true, and I never had any reason to distrust him. He had always been genuine and trustworthy. I used to live in a very small town in West Texas. You could ask anyone there to share a true paranormal story, and they would give you at least 3. I was one of those people. The first encounter I had was when I was 10 or 11. My grandmother had woken me up so we could go to church. I had gotten my ears pierced a few months before this, so I would put my earrings on in a very old mirror we had hanging behind the front door. This was when I noticed something moving behind me. I turned, thinking it was my great-grandmother walking by. No one was behind me. This didn't really bother me until I turned back to the mirror and saw a man walking toward me with his hand out ready to grab me. This is one of my most vivid memories. He was tall, had black hair, and was wearing a gray shirt and red pants. When I turned around again, he was gone. I called for my grandmother, scared out of my mind. I explained that I had seen a man behind me in the mirror, and she just brushed it off. That was certainly not the last time I saw the man. As I got older, the entity became more malicious in a way. I didn't feel safe in the living room. I couldn't sleep with my door open anymore because I could see a large shadow standing in the kitchen doorway. I could hear men arguing at night and someone pacing in the hallway. I would mess around on the piano when someone with heavy footsteps would pace, and then I would get this horrible feeling of dread. One night, I had slept on the floor at my dogs, and my closet doors began to rattle like someone was banging on them from the inside. I would try and explain to my grandmother what was happening, but she would tell me it was the house shifting, or it was just my imagination. But it wasn't. My friends never wanted to come over anymore because of how creepy the house was. My neighbors saw someone standing out on our back porch, looking into the window at us. I spent most of my time at my friend's house, or in my bedroom, because of how scared I was. This was about the time my neighbor's older sister got a Ouija board. We played with it a few times at her house, never bothering to read the instructions. She ended up giving it to me and her brother after a series of nightmares she had had. We decided to use it at my house. Whatever we contacted was violent and did not like my grandmother. I ended up throwing the board away after having a similar experience to what my neighbor's sister had. I sort of learned to deal with whatever was in the house after my father kicked me out of my bedroom so he could use it and made me sleep in the living room. I had vivid nightmares that would keep me up. I would see people standing in doorways. Something would pace around the couch I slept on, but I just started to tune it out. My mother visited at one point and remembers hearing a little girl say something about makeup and also what sounded like someone running from the hall to the couch I was on. I moved out last summer, and I feel like whatever it was either followed me here, or there is something in my parents' house. We hear voices in the hallway, and something mimics how we talk. My mother thought she heard me in the living room when I was in my bedroom. There are two distinct voices that I've heard. There is a woman near my room and the short hall leading to the master bedroom who wants my attention, and a man in the kitchen and den area who really doesn't want me there. I had finished baking one day when the cabinet that has the cookie sheets in it opened and slammed shut on its own. The oven has opened and closed while I was cleaning some dishes too. The kitchen and living room area, again, make me feel really uncomfortable. I feel odd breezes, like someone rushed past me, and an unexplainable feeling, like someone is chasing me down the hall to my bedroom. I remember whistling once while I was walking down the hall to the bathroom, and the minute I shut the door, something mimicked the tune I had been whistling. This happened at around 2 a.m. when no one else was up. Recently, I was waiting for a family member to come and pick me up, and it sounded like someone was walking on the tiles that led to the kitchen. I thought it was my cousin at first, but then I realized it wasn't even 9:30 yet, and it was a Saturday. No one was up. I would periodically look into the kitchen and see if it was actually somebody, but no one would be there. Then the walking would start up again. I ended up waiting for my ride outside, too scared to go back inside. Apparently, someone has done some weird rituals in this house. There are 2 Venus symbols facing away from each other, painted on my parents' ceiling. No matter how many times they paint over it, it somehow bleeds through. There were also several bloody rags and weird symbols carved into some of the wooden posts in the attic. I usually don't like talking about some of this because I feel that when I do, the activity gets worse. Like I'm angry whatever it is. But sharing is caring, right? To tell my Ouija board story, there needs to be a little context. I make Ouija boards. It's one of my many hobbies, but not just any flimsy pizza box and Sharpie ones, but sturdy, wooden ones with calligraphy, lettering, inlays, and the whole 9 yards. I spend my time on them, making them unique and putting care into each of them, so I haven't made many. I'm not sure, but these details may be significant because I have a connection with each board. I believe it's affected the way my experiences have gone. If not the connection, the quartz inlay on my first board definitely did. My friends were excited to try my first board. None of us have ever used one before, though. We didn't dive into it blind. I made sure of that. I looked up things to do, things not to do, to not let happen. We didn't find all of the information I now know, but we had enough to know when something went wrong. There were 4 of us the first time, 3 in the round each time, and 1 always as a scribe. Of course, nothing happened at first. We made little circles on the board and stayed on it for a long time with nothing happening. Soon I tried something I'd heard about. I offered energy to the spirits. Then it started slowly. I made sure none of my friends were pushing it around, and it seemed legitimate. To add to the volatility, I noticed each spirit we contacted had a sort of handwriting, meaning they moved the planchette with their own little quirks, and none were the same in the way they might move the letters or say yes twice in a row. We tried to keep constant with the questions we asked, and when one spirit said goodbye, we would switch out scribes. Some of us got tired through the rounds, but I stayed fine. I switched out of the 4th round just for the sake of it, though. Things went south in that round. The first 3 spirits were generally friendly and helpful, until I was the scribe. I had led the other rounds, and this time it was one of my friends. Now this is where the quartz comes in. For the sun and the moon on the first board, I wanted to make them inlays. The sun was mother of pearl, and the moon was little quartz stones. She started off like we always did, asking if there was a spirit with us. It said yes. When she asked it for a name, all it would give us was O. So we started guessing names that started with O. We asked it if its name was Owen, and immediately it said yes. I thought it was odd we got it on the first try, but I dismissed it as coincidence. We asked him his age next, and he said 0. But then he went to 2. We thought this was also odd, so we asked it if he meant he was 20 or just 2. We told him to go to the sun for 2 and the moon for 20. He went to the sun. He did a lot of things I dismissed as strange, like starting to go through the alphabet and making little circles on the side of the board. We asked him before he got too far into the alphabet if he was playing a game. It went to yes. Things got weirder, though. He went to the 2 corners on the side of the sun and kept making loose, irregular ovals and kept going back to O. When the planchette moved so far towards one of the players that it nearly went off the board, we had enough. We forced it to stay on the board, and we said goodbye. We found out how many signs we missed and mistakes we made when we looked up more information right after, and over the next few days, especially after I realized an important fact. The planchette never went to the side of the board with the quartz moon. Supposedly, quartz wards off evil, and not once did the planchette even go next to it. It wasn't very clear quartz, but it still seemed to have an effect. I realized the planchette was also trying to go to the 4 corners of the board through the alphabet and off the board, all to let the spirit escape and have a doorway into my home. When it did those odd ovals, I realized it was probably trying to do figure 8s, another sign something is wrong. It finally hit me that we might have been dealing with the board demon, Zozo, when I realized it kept going back to O. The letter Z is on the other side of the board, and so it couldn't spell the other half of its name. It's only a possibility, I've had others since then try to act like they are him to scare me, but the evidence is compelling enough for me to believe. I started putting silver on the board. After that, whenever I used it, I stayed in every session. We took breaks between spirits, and I haven't had problems since. Nothing too notable has happened with me in Ouija boards, until my session a week ago. I don't often use the board, and this was at a party. Now I am depressed and occasionally have suicidal thoughts, as much as I try to fight it and push them away. I've been crying earlier and have been having some negative thoughts at the little party, but my best friend managed to get me through it and get me back into things. Later, with different friends, I ended up using my latest Ouija board. We met 2 spirits, and it was one of the most heartwarming sessions I've ever had. The first was a little kid who was concerned that I was crying earlier and was very sweet to me. The second was an older man who spoke in mostly gibberish, as some spirits tend to do, with open-ended questions, but clearly he had a message for me, to say no. I asked what, and he just spelled out, suicide. So I guess the moral of my story is that it is a tool, and if you know what you are doing, things will go well. But if you don't, it could get very, very bad. I am a 15-year-old girl, and I live in the small town of Pudsey in England. My story is about something a lot of people may have experienced, but never realized. Last year during autumn or fall, as you may know it, I had an encounter that still haunts my mind to this day. It happened late at night, around 3 in the morning, and I was fast asleep. I had never had problems falling asleep, and I've been a heavy sleeper all my life. I rarely woke up in the middle of the night. But during my sleep, all of a sudden, I felt a pressure on my chest. I didn't open my eyes straight away. I was too confused. The pressure increased as if someone was sitting down on me. I couldn't breathe at all. In fear, I tried to move to sit up, and at first I tried to move my arms. They wouldn't budge, and it felt like there was something wrapped tightly around them. So tight, in fact, that it was hurting so much I wanted to scream. But I couldn't make a sound. In fear, I opened my eyes, and what I saw was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. In front of me was a pitch-black face with only big red eyes and teeth. No lips, just teeth set up to resemble a grin. But that wasn't just it. It was set on me, staring right at me. Staring and smiling, gripping my arm unbelievably tight. I wanted to scream and cry, and this went on for about 45 seconds, and it just disappeared. It just vanished right in front of me. I sat up panting and choking, fighting for air. I looked down at my arm, struggling to see in the dark, but what I saw was very visible, even in the darkness. Finger marks. Large finger marks wrapped all the way around my arm. It made a bright red ring around it, and it was hurting. I did not go back to sleep that night. I just stared up at the ceiling for hours, trying to process what had happened. The next morning, I told my dad. He looked at me frightened and told me a couple of nights ago he had experienced the exact same thing. My dad normally isn't scared of anything. He's a very tough man, but he was terrified when he told me this. I went up to my room and searched if there was a reason this had happened. I found that not being able to breathe and the feeling of being sat on was also known as sleep paralysis, and people experience it all the time. Thinking that's what it was, I should have left it there. But I kept on researching, and I found the shadow people. They are dark beings that watch you while you sleep, and if they are interested enough, they will sit on you and stare to get a better look. I knew then that that's what happened. I've not experienced the shadow people again, and I'm glad, and I'm still terrified to this day. Now this story came to me from a friend of a friend, so its legitimacy is up in the air, but some of the facts surrounding it have to be true. I met my girlfriend through her cousin, who happens to be a close friend of mine. They're both no-nonsense kind of people. They were raised by hard parents who had a very no-nonsense point of view. Naturally, they left off ghost stories most of the time, but not this one. My friend and my girlfriend have family in Utah, and they visit regularly, and when they go, they always catch up with a friend of theirs. Let's call him Jones. This story belongs to Jones. So way back when, around 1998 or 99, Jones was just a kid. He had a pretty tight curfew and wasn't allowed to stay up past a certain hour. This was a problem for Jones, since he has a profound love of gaming that he still has today. So Jones snuck out of his room one night to play a few rounds of some games before really going to bed. He walks down to the basement where the console was and starts to play. So far so good, right? Anyway, he's playing when he hears a loud thud from one of the basement windows. The kind that are just above ground level. He looks and he sees a bright red, almost pink hair-covered hand. And then this face pops into view. And it's just plain wrong. Oddly colored eyes, long, misshapen nose, and a too big smile is how he described it. Immediately, he feels wrong and starts screaming and shouting. After an indeterminate period of time, his father comes down the stairs with a gun in tow and sees the thing. He starts shouting right away, "He's too young. He doesn't need this yet." And stalks out to the yard and fires a few shots. About 10 years go by without incident. Fast forward to around 2008. Jones, now closer to being man, is having strange dreams of that creature. It's sitting on a rafter in his dad's shop and pointing down, grinning like a madman the whole time. He has this dream for about 3 days, then it suddenly stops. He gets called out of school one day and finds out his dad has killed himself, hung from a rafter in his shop. The funeral comes and goes. The family grieves and largely comes to terms. Until one day, Jones gets to talking with his grandmother. He finds out that the thing that came to him in his dreams is something that all of the men in the family see. Some are strong and don't kill themselves, but others cave and do. She tells him about how it's been something that's been going on in the family for a long time, all the way back to when they first came to America. This incident took place in the spring of 2005 on a road called Spooks Hill Road. Go figure. The road borders a reservoir and gets relatively deep into the woods. At the time, I was 17 and riding my motorcycle back from my friend's place. It was the time of day where the sun had already set, but it wasn't quite nighttime yet. The sky was a dark blue and the woods were pitch black. I think it's called twilight. I was on a sport bike and thoroughly enjoying the twisty nature of the road, fairly in excess of the posted 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. I had my high beams on to see further through the turns and came upon a wider right turn in the road, with the guardrail on the inside of the turn. The reservoir was also on the right side of the road, but there were a few hundred feet of woods between it and the road. As I came upon the apex of the turn, I was a few feet away from the guardrail and saw what I can only describe as a 6 or 8-year-old girl on the outside of the guardrail. She wasn't illuminated per se, but the headlight definitely made her white clothing light up. She appeared to be wearing a gown of sorts, almost like one of those old-timey nightgowns. Her hands were on the guardrail, and I saw her head follow me as I went by. I was probably going 50 or so at the time, so I didn't have much time to look at her. But what stuck out the most was she had no face. There was just black there. The closest image of what her face looked like was the thing from the Muppets Christmas Carol. The hairs on my neck stood up so fast that it stung. As soon as I was able to, I slowed to a stop. The rational part of my brain told me there might be a young girl lost in the woods. The primal part of my brain was telling me to get the hell out of there. I had gone too far past the turn to see the apex where she was, so I turned around. I slowly went by the turn, looking at the spot where she had been, and saw nothing. No one. Then I tried to reproduce the incident by going by that fast again, hoping it was some sort of optical illusion with the headlight. Still, nothing where she was. After the incident, I rode home. There, I told my grandmother about the incident and how thoroughly creeped out I was. My grandmother, a super religious lady, said she believes it may have been my guardian angel and that its appearance forced me to slow down, possibly preventing me from hitting a deer or something. I'm not very spiritual at all, but it is a nice perspective on something that was truly creepy and hard to explain. This began when I was little. My mother's friend was a security guard, and one day she brought me a list of those codes they use to communicate different situations without making the public panic. And I invented a game where I would knock the different numbers on the wall and it would mean something to the imaginary monster in the wall of my bedroom. I played this with a friend of mine for some time. Then we went into a place my family called the secret bedroom, which is basically a room on the second floor that was all the front house in length, connecting my parents' bedroom on one side to my brother's bedroom on the other side. The room was never finished and is extremely dirty with tons of dead insects and graffiti we did over the years, but it was our favorite playroom. So what we did is that we sat in the middle of the room and started playing again. Then one of us had the idea to knock nursery rhymes onto the wall to see if the monster would answer. And strangely, this time, he did. He would finish all the songs correctly, to the point we were convinced it was my youngest brother in his bedroom playing with us. But when we opened the door to his room, we saw he was simply playing video games. He got mad when he saw us enter his room. We also realized the spot we were knocking on wasn't even connected to his bedroom. It was right between the two rooms where there's nothing on the other side. If you go far enough, you would just reach a wall that was situated over the main staircase. And to actually reach it, you would need a really tall ladder, and to dare yourself to install it right in the middle of the stairs, so it was impossible someone was playing with us. But being the kid I was, I just forgot about it after a couple of days. Not so long after this, I was taking a shower when I heard someone knocking on the door. I yelled, "What is it?" But no one answered. I left the shower and opened the door to see who it was, thinking they didn't hear me. But no one was there. I could hear my parents in the living room downstairs and my brother playing video games in his room. I just shrugged and went back to my shower. Time passed. On one particular night, I really wasn't tired, but since it was bedtime, I was stuck inside my room for the night. I played different games in my bed when I had the idea to make a small tent by getting under the covers and extending my arm, forming this so-called tent. When I did, someone knocked, but right on the palm of my hand. I got a chill in my back and just waited, thinking I just imagined it, but it happens again. I could feel the knuckles on my palm, and thinking I would catch my brother doing a prank on me. I quickly removed the blanket off of myself, but still, no one. The door was still closed and there was no sign of life. I had trouble falling asleep that night. The next event jumps all the way to the holidays, so long later that as a child I actually completely stopped worrying about it. I believe it was a Christmas morning. I had been woken up by knocking in the wall of my bedroom. The knocking clearly did the first verses of Jingle Bells, and thinking I was imagining it again, I jumped right out of my skin when I heard my father yell from the other side of the wall that I need to stop knocking on the walls because he needs some sleep. And my father is not the joking type. It clearly wasn't him. I talked to my mother later that day and said she heard it too, but she just didn't really care. The very last thing I ever had to do with the hand was when I was playing in the basement with my cousins and my youngest brother. We would play a game called The Whistler, which is pretty much hide and seek in the dark, but the point of the game is that the ones hiding need to scare the ones searching before the seeker scares you. My cousins and I were all hiding in the same big room, and I hid inside an old wardrobe on one side of the room, while they hid on the other side, so we could get him from both sides at the same time. When my brother began searching and entered the room, I was getting ready to strike when something grabbed my ankle. I screamed, and I was a bit mad I lost so easily, without even noticing my brother. But the truth is, when I went out of my hiding place, They were all staring at me with huge eyes. I told my cousins my brother got me, and my brother said, no, I couldn't have. I was still at the door. My cousin, still on the other side of the room, just didn't speak a word, and we exchanged roles. This was the last time I had contact with the hand, and since then I have moved out of the house, so I doubt I will ever feel or hear it again anytime soon. My gran used to tell me a story of the White Lady. She is a ghostly apparition that appears in the dead of night around the country roads near my gran's house. Some people have encountered her and say she is truly terrifying. She's a huge white spirit that haunts the nearby roads, frightening anyone who happens to be driving in that location at night. The most terrifying description of the White Lady is her face. She has no features at all, no nose, no mouth, and no eyes. Just a pale, blank face that digs into your soul. I once heard that my uncle was on his way to my gran's one night after a few hours of drinking. Apparently, he was walking down one of the roads in the dead of night when he encountered her. She appeared right behind him. Terrified and afraid, he sprinted all the way down the road to my gran's house with the White Lady close behind. After that traumatic experience, he has not been down that road ever since. One night, I stayed at my gran's. I got up for a drink of water around 2 in the morning. I quietly walked downstairs in the front room, and to my curiosity, I stupidly opened the curtain and looked out of the window. What I saw that night scarred me for the rest of my life. A pale, white, featureless face looking right in at me. Just like all the stories I heard of her, I didn't shut the curtain and quickly raced upstairs straight to my gran's room. I spent the rest of the night up there. That image will always stick in my mind. Truly, it was a terrifying experience, and I hope I never see her again. My family lived in Texas for 7 years when they decided to move up to the Pacific Northwest of Washington State, where we still live, and where my story begins. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor. My dad has commented that I have the nicest bedroom in our community, and it is. Now, I always sleep with my bedroom door closed, so no one would disturb me while I slept, and that included our 2 cats and a dog. For a couple of times within the first few months, I would feel pressure on the side of my bed, as if something had just sat down. I would put my hand on the spot where I felt it, but there was nothing there. I also didn't see a thing. I believe I am one of those people who would never see an actual ghost, but things did start to change. One of our cats, a short-haired brown tabby named Rosie, loved sleeping on my bed during the daylight hours. I would always find her curled up on my bed. In June, before I graduated high school, Rosie was attacked by dogs and disappeared. We never did find her alive or dead. Since then, I often would feel something up against my legs while I slept. During one of these times, I heard purring, and I knew that it was my beloved cat, Rosie, sleeping on my bed like she used to. Then, suddenly, I stopped feeling it, which caused something to change. I would continue to feel something against my legs and also on my back, as if something was sleeping next to me. I would feel something weird going up my back, as if something was in the room. Something was trying to harass me, but couldn't. But that wasn't all that was happening. We have a small little deck on the 2nd floor, and I have a door that went out to that with a window right next to it, which would leave plenty of light from the moon to shine in. Several times during the night, I have seen a dark shadow blocking out the light. I can never really tell where it was standing because it was so large and massive, and I still see it to this day. I don't know what it is, but so far it hasn't become physical. That is my only worry, but I can deal with it because I can only see it at night. During my time in the Marines, I have never had any odd or terrifying experiences until my last deployment. During this deployment, I was sent to the Middle East. My command kind of tossed me aside because they already had one sergeant in control of the section I was supposed to be in. I was then sent to the security forces for the base. While on security forces, or Sec 4 as us in the business call it, I was assigned to the NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge, for a post on the night shift. Funny enough, ghost stories about old military bases stretch very far in the community, and most of them are not believable. While on this post, I was in charge of 4 other men, 2 of them who were originally from the section I was recently whored out from. Every night was spent watching his cars drive in and out of our gate, the usual. We had several paranormal encounters involving that post that I won't go into to save time. But fast forward a few months of standing this post every night. Marine Corps deployment living, me and my unit returned to the United States to our home base. And that's when everything started. Originally, I thought it was just me. About once or twice a week, I had the same nightmare over and over. In it, I was strangled by a faceless shadow who was extremely tall and had very long arms. The dream originally started as just another nightmare, possibly due to a side effect of vaccinations, change in time zones, flight exhaustion, alcohol, anything else. But this went on for about 2 weeks. When I went home on leave to my home in another state, the nightmares seemed to stop for a week or 2. Until my last night at home. I was going to sleep as usual in my family's spare bedroom. I've been moved out of there for several years already, with my trusty dog sleeping beside me to keep me company. That's when the nightmares got worse. This time it was very vivid and surreal, where I didn't wake up at the first sign of being startled. During those dreams, everything started very boring and normal-like. And the one I remember the most, I was going about my daily routine on deployment. I was off shift and walking to the chow hall when I stopped to have a smoke with my guys, where I would hear them say, "Hey Sergeant, did you hear about something?" I don't remember what he told me, and I would sit there and continue to make conversation for a few minutes as I took drags off my cigarette, occasionally cracking jokes. Then I'd get the younger ones life advice. When walking into the front door of the chow hall, I would clear out my rifle. We had one on us at all times. When opening the doors, everything went black, like the doors opened to black as I stepped inside to look around. I would then stop and turn around to head back out the doors, when everything behind me disappears as well. I'm alone, still in my gear from standing post, when all of a sudden, I see out of the corner of my eye an even darker shadow moving towards me, and when I looked straight at it, I was paralyzed. The shadowy figure stood around 8 feet tall and had long arms. Once it was close to me, it wrapped its hands around my neck, and I could feel myself gasping for air, slowly losing consciousness. After what felt like forever of screaming, I woke up in my bed, back at home, actually screaming my lungs out. My dog was freaking out. I woke the entire house up that night. About a week after that, I have already driven back to my home base, and I was back to work. While back, I was losing sleep. The frequency of those dreams were reaching about 3 times a week at this point. It was the end of the week and about to start a weekend. I was then assigned to barracks duty. Barracks duty is a mindless job. You tour the barracks, stop a drunk guy here or there, tell people to turn down their music, occasionally have to talk to someone important who wants to check up on his Marines. So yeah, that post was 24 hours long every day. When one night, about 3 a.m., I was touring the smoke pit of the barracks, and I run into 2 of my guys I stood post with. I walk up, light a cigarette, and decided to talk to them for a few minutes before I returned back to the duty hut. I asked them what they were doing up so late, although it wasn't uncommon to see a Marine up and in the smoke pit at 3 in the morning. I wanted to make friendly conversation. My 2 guys started talking about nightmares and not sleeping. I was prying into it for a few minutes out of curiosity when one of them pulled out his sketchbook for tattoo ideas. He then said, "This is what I see in my nightmares." Both me and my buddy went very silent and extremely cold. That creature was the same thing we both saw in our dreams. We then went into detail and saw that all of our nightmares were the same. Doing normal things, fades to black, shadowy figure strangles us. Down to the very shape of the figure itself, it was all the same. None of us were able to sleep that night. Even though it was my job to stay awake all night for duty, I didn't feel the want to sleep that night at all. That was over a year ago. I have since left the Marines. I decided to go back to college, and those nightmares have seemed to have gone away. But every few months, I do have a nightmare similar to those I used to have. I wonder if my guys are still having them too, and if these nightmares mean something. Or if something is just simply haunting us and followed us home way back from the Middle East. As I am sure that many have had experiences that range from the typical to the extraordinary, I would like to share an experience that was tactile and carried with it a still pondered thought of what else could something like this do. I also want to say that my whole life has been filled with more unusual things than I care to recall. From seeing ghosts to encountering UFOs, it has been such that anymore when I make friends with someone, I tell them that they might have something odd or strange happen to them in the course of our friendship. With that being stated, here is a recount of an occurrence of high strangeness which was witnessed by about 5 people, myself included, that we refer to as the shoestring incident. It is a short story, so without further ado, back in around 95, I lived in a 2-story house of which I occupied the 2nd floor. I had bandmates and like 2 friends all sitting and talking about everything from Spider-Man to the question of, do aliens exist? While we were talking and such, my drummer dozed off, like he usually does when we're all winding down from practicing. He was not out for 5 minutes when he jarred himself awake and readjusted the position of his feet, which, at the time, were right foot over left foot. He found himself not being able to adjust and looked down to see what was preventing him to do so. He uttered out loud, "What the hell?" Then, "Guys, what the hell is this?" We all asked him what he was talking about. He said, Who did this?" At that point, we all gathered around him and were more than a little freaked out that his shoelaces from both shoes were retied into a checkerboard fashion at about a 7x7 square. Not only that, but in the center of the checkerboard was a wildly arranged knot, like a Japanese ornamental knot, which he nor any of us could figure out how or who did it. He had to remove his shoes together as they were very tightly bound. 3 of us were working to get it undone, and the others just stood around and were too shaken by it to really be comfortable. After about 45 minutes, we finally got them undone. After that, a close friend who was present moved out of the state, but before he left, as we were hanging out, he told me, "Man, I'm going to move to Michigan. I just wanted you to know why. I've been thinking about that time when T's shoes were all knotted up. I can't make sense of it, and that scares the hell out of me. That's why I need to move." Needless to say, my old friend and former drummer tells me that there is not a day that passes that he does not wonder what happened that night. This happened when I was about 12. It was a summer night, and I had just finished playing soccer with a couple of other kids from the neighborhood. We played in the back of the neighborhood, which had an open field with some tables and surrounded by forest. We sat down for a while until some kids started to go home. When it was just me and a younger boy, I started to hear whispering sounds coming from the woods. I looked in that direction and didn't see anything, so I continued to talk with the other boy. After a while, I heard it again, and I noticed that the other boy heard it as well. This time, when I looked in the direction, I did see something. Even though it was dark, I could clearly see that it was a man in a black hood, floating. His head was at a branch of a big tree, which had to be at least 15 feet off the ground. After I heard him making weird whispering sounds again, I ran, and the other boy followed. We eventually came to a couple of other kids still outside, and we stopped. I noticed my companion was crying, and he ran to his brother, who was one of the older kids that was outside. Feeling safer, I walked home and told my mom what I saw. I guess she thought I was just joking, because she told me that's what happens to kids who stay out too late. Needless to say, I didn't go back there when it got dark. This experience made me realize there are a lot of things in this world, strange things that no one may be able to explain. and a lot of them happen in the dark. When this story took place, I was 12. I am a female, and I stand only at about 4'8". I'm easily scared, knowing I can be taken down without much effort. One night, I was sitting in my living room texting my boyfriend. My nephew and sister had just left, and my parents were away for the night. I was all alone and already paranoid. My house is haunted, I believe, by a few spirits, who I think are nice unless you say something they don't like. So I was pretty used to the creaking noises here and there. But on this particular night, I heard a clicking noise that made my hair stand on end. I turned down the volume on the TV so I could hear it more clearly. I heard a loud bang come from my bedroom. I jumped. Scared, I hurriedly and quietly ran to the back room. I kept hearing loud noises outside, and they seemed to be getting closer. I rushed up to the attic, and I told my boyfriend I thought there was someone in my house. At first, he treated it like a joke, but when I told him about the loud noises, he seemed worried. I told him I loved him, and I put down my phone. I waited listening, until I finally had the courage to leave the attic. Normally, all you have to do is kick the door and the stairs fall. But I sat there pressing all my weight on it, and it wouldn't budge, as if someone was holding it up. I began to cry, thinking that I would not make it through the night. I could hear more noise downstairs. It sounded like someone was just throwing stuff everywhere. I could hear things breaking in the kitchen. I put my hands over my ears, whispering, "No, no, please." At this point, I wasn't sure if there were people in my house, or if it was the spirits. Suddenly, it all stopped. The stairs fell on their own. I raced down, and faster than I've ever run before, I ran out of the house. I stayed at my neighbor's place until the next morning. The next day, when I got back home with my parents, there was no trace of anyone being there. Nothing was disturbed, but all of mine and my mother's jewelry was gone, though nothing else of value was touched. Yes, I know it sounds like a robbery, but I swear it was not another person in my house that night. Even stranger still, all the messages on my phone from that night were deleted, and when I talked to my boyfriend about the conversation from the attic, he has absolutely no memory of us talking at all. And what about all the breaking and crashing I heard downstairs? There wasn't a trace of anything broken. I still don't understand any of this, and I have a bad feeling it's going to happen again. One night after the midweek church service, my parents went over to my aunt and uncle's house. I was 10 years old at the time. I was told to go into the kitchen and tend to the soup cooking on the stove, to stir it so that it wouldn't burn. Soon the pastor and other elders from the church came over. They just said that they were there to pray for my uncle. I thought that he was just sick. They all went upstairs together where my uncle was, and soon I heard the noises and banging on the walls, and someone was yelling and screaming. It was all but inaudible to me downstairs in the kitchen. But after a little while, things calmed down. Then I heard someone walking in the hallway upstairs and down the steps. And I swear, to this day, out of the stairway came this black cloud like a fog. It came at me and stopped at the kitchen doorway. I stood there too afraid to do anything or realized what it was. Then it suddenly went across the dining room and into the living room. The front door then opened up in front of it, and the black cloudy fog went outside. Later I learned that the pastor was there to do an exorcism on my uncle because he was foolish not to believe that there was a real devil, that he had done some very nasty things to invite the devil inside. I wasn't told much more, but it sounds like my uncle got more than he bargained for. This story happened when I was about 8 years old, and I even confirmed it with my mother recently. A long time ago, my grandfather built a wooden cabin deep into the woods so my family could spend some time with nature. There was no electricity, no running water, not even toilets. Since the only thing to do was to play outside, I explored the area a lot. The only rule was that if I didn't see the cabin through the trees anymore, I have to come back. When this happened, I was pretty experienced in navigating myself through the forest, so I dared to break the rule, and this time go as far as I was comfortable with. I told myself that if I was going to do this, I'd walk in a straight line to be sure to not get lost, even when I don't see the cabin anymore. So I started my little exploration, and sure enough, after a couple of minutes, I couldn't see the cabin through the trees. So I continued forward. Some time passed and I noticed something in the distance. A wooden fence. At that time, I was already pretty sure no one lived in that direction, and even less so close to our cabin, so I went to check it out. Suddenly, I heard a dog bark repeatedly. When I reached the fence, there were some little holes in them, as most wooden fences do, and I looked through. I could see a dark, short-haired dog barking at me and a small house. It was nothing impressive. It really was just a regular small house with one floor and maybe an earth basement, but I couldn't really tell. My first reaction was to tell myself that someone built a house on our land illegally and thought they wouldn't get caught. So I ran back home like if the house was going to disappear, and I found my mother on the front yard. I sprinted towards her and I told her everything, and obviously she said there was no way someone could have built a house there without us knowing. And she thought I was joking or something, but I insisted so much that she decided to ask my brother to follow me so I could show him this house. And my previous fear became real. The house had completely vanished. I searched for the wooden fence again. It couldn't have been that far since I had gone in a straight line. But nothing. My brother just got bored and told me we were going back. I told my mom we didn't find anything, and the experience stopped there. But a couple of years later, I was talking to my father about the land, and he told me we weren't the first to own it, as there were 2 other people living here a long time ago. They were in little houses, and there were 1 or 2 old farms, but nothing was left of them except ruins. I visited these ruins and realized at the time that it was what I saw. It was one of those small homes that was here, standing here, a long time ago.